The next part of this lecture is to give you an idea about data and how we deal with data. We will introduce you some basic concepts and terms that you will encounter in statistics, such as population, samples, data, and variable. Now that we know that public health is all about understanding the health of the population, the next question is, what do we want to know about the population and how do we do it? As a public health practitioner, we are interested in the health of the population, as I've said before. However, in medical or public health research, we often have to resort to using a sample of individuals rather than to study the entire population of interest. It could be for practical reasons because it is too expensive to study everyone, or simply not possible to include the whole population, or sometimes it is unethical to do so. What is population? We define population as a set of things or objects in which we have an interest to study or research in at a particular point of time. Whereas a sample is a subset of this population. In statistics, we intend to use the result that we obtain from the sample to draw conclusions about the population that we are interested in. Let us use a simple example to illustrate this. For example, we are interested to find out the prevalence of smoking or how common smoking among students in this university. At current, this university has about 17,000 students. This is probably unlikely to interview all 17,000 students. So, what we would do is to randomly select a sample of students that would represent the entire population of university students and collect information from this sample of students. To draw a sample from a population, we use a procedure called sampling. The method used to conduct this procedure is called sampling method. There are several sampling methods that we can use. These methods are classified into two broad categories, that is, probability sampling or non-probability sampling. Probability sampling requires a sampling frame and samples are randomly selected from this frame. Some examples of sampling frame include a list of households from the national census, patients from hospital, workers from factory, students from school, and so on. In our case, where we are interested in the smoking status of university students, the sampling frame would be a list of students from this university. In probability sampling, the chance of a member being selected as a sample from the population can be estimated. Within probability sampling, there are several types of sampling procedure, such as simple random sampling, systematic sampling, cluster sampling, and stratified sampling. Non-probability sampling, on the other hand, does not involve random selection and usually sample is selected by convenience. This is the major difference between non-probability and probability sampling. Bear in mind that in theory, the use of statistical method for analysis requires the assumption that samples are drawn using probability sampling. Now that we have selected a sample, we need to collect data from the sample. Data is collected by measuring a variable or a group of variables. A variable is a characteristic of interest which can vary between subject or objects. In our previous example, the information that we are interested in is the smoking status among this sample of university students that we selected. In this case, smoking status is a variable. Smoking status between students will vary or different because some students smoke while others do not smoke. In other words, there is variation in the characteristic that we are interested in between these students. Variation is an important concept in statistics. In fact, you will soon find out that the whole field of statistics revolves around this concept of variation. We are interested to study a characteristic because we believe that everyone is different. Next, we might be interested to know whether there is a difference in the proportion of males and female students who smoke. Therefore, we could also collect information on gender. We could further hypothesize that students who smoke also tend to be obese. We suspect that there is probably an association between smoking and obesity. Therefore, one of the measurements that we might want to include in our study is their body mass index, which would be measured as height and weight as an indicator for obesity. Height and weight are examples of quantitative variables. They are called quantitative because their measurements are expressed in numeric form or numbers, and these numbers have values. This means that an average can be derived from these values. A simple example, we want to find the average weight of two respondents. Let us say one respondent weighed about 50 kilograms and the other weighed about 54 kilograms. Therefore, the average weight of these two respondents would be 52 kilograms. On the other hand, smoking status or gender are qualitative variables or known as categorical data. This variable may be expressed as number or letters. However, the numbers do not have values by themselves because they are merely codes for categories. For example, for gender, there are two categories, which is male and female. We could also express these two categories using letters such as M or F. We could also express it using numbers where 1 represents male and 2 represent female. Remember that we cannot derive an average from these categories or numbers because there is no meaning to this average value. There are different types of quantitative and qualitative variables. Quantitative variables can be further divided into two subtypes, that is, first, discrete data, that is quantitative data collected as a whole number. For example, number of children. And secondly, continuous data, which we often express as fraction or decimal. For example, weight or height. There are two types of qualitative data, that is nominal and ordinal. Nominal data involve categories with no particular order, direction, or magnitude. Some examples of nominal data includes gender, smoking, and ethnicity. Ordinal data has some kind of order among the categories that usually imply direction or magnitude. For example, severity of disease, which we could measure as mild, moderate, and severe. Let us summarize these different types of variables in this graphical diagram. It is important to understand the different types of variables because it will determine how you should analyze your data and interpret them in a meaningful way. First, to identify the type of variable, we need to know if the variable has unit. If the data has unit, it would be quantitative data. If the data has no unit, it would be qualitative data. If the quantitative data is obtained by counting, it will be known as a discrete data. And if it is measured, the data is a continuous data. On the other hand, for qualitative data, if it has no particular order, it would be nominal data, and vice versa would be an ordinal data. Now that we have learned about why and how we select a sample from the population, why we collect data from sample, and what type of data we would collect, the next step is to decide what to do with the information that we collected.